Sorry to interrupt, but this call is now being recorded.
Hello and welcome to a briefing call of the Interagency Task Force on Shootings on the Temple Mount, Arab Discourse and State Minority Relations in the Aftermath, with your host, Mikhail Steinman. Mikhail, go ahead, please.
Hi, shalom everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Interagency Task Force on Israeli-Arab Issues for today's briefing, which will focus on the recent events and developments around Temple Mount and more specifically on their effect on Jewish-Arab relations within the country. On July 14th, a shooting attack took place on the Temple Mount, an attack which was carried out by 3 Arab citizens of Israel from al-Fahim, and in which 2 Druze police officers were shot dead. This event and its aftermath, namely the security measures that were taken by the Israeli government on Temple Mount and the discourse that evolved in Israel following these measures, and more specifically, the placement of metal detectors at the entrance to the site, all these elevated tensions surrounding control of the site contributed to the deterioration of Jewish-Arab relations inside Israel and also brought to the surface internal challenges within Israel's Arab community. On today's call, we will hear from our speakers how the Jewish and Arab reactions to the attacks and to the conflict over security measures on the Temple Mount reflect current trends in Jewish-Arab relations and state-minority relations more broadly, and we'll get an insight into the discourse within Arab society following these events. And in order to explore all this, we're very grateful to be joined by Dr. Yonatan Mendel, head of Manarat, the Center for Jewish-Arab Relations at the Leer Jerusalem Institute, and by Rawnak, Natour, co-executive director of Sikui, the Association for the Advancement of Civic Equality in Israel. So thank you both for joining us. We'll open by the presentations of Yoni and Rawnak, and then we will open for questions. Yoni, please, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all very much for joining us. We heard that there are quite a few of you on the other side of the line, so it's a great honor to speak. I guess that also because that we speak about Jerusalem and about the situation in Jerusalem, about an incident that happened in Jerusalem, in the center of the old city, on the Temple Mount, Al-Haram al-Sharif, it's quite a topical issue. And I think that this is not a coincidence that there is so much interest in what's happening in Jerusalem, because it is already rather obvious that Jerusalem is the center of a lot of the political aspiration of both Israelis and Palestinians, and also because it is a city that encapsulates quite a lot of the problems. It includes also the question of Jewish and Arab. It includes also questions of religiosity and secularity, of occupation, obviously, of annexation, of even refugees. There is a refugee camp inside the municipal borders of Jerusalem, the Sharafat refugee camps, and many other topics. So I think that speaking about Jerusalem, it's a very important issue, because if once we are able to solve the situation in Jerusalem and to bring peace to Jerusalem, it might be a good formula that will later on spread to other places. Now, if we need to speak about what happened in the Temple Mount, Al-Haram al-Sharif, and the killing of the 2 policemen and by 3 Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel from al-Fahim, I think that it is important to put things into context. It means that we shouldn't look at the situation in Jerusalem and at the tension as one that actually started in mid-July and before everything was peaceful and calm. And I think that in order to explain it better, there are 4 main contexts that one should take into consideration when she wants to understand the situation in Jerusalem. First is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, on which I will say 2 words. The second is Jewish-Arab relations, also within Israel. The third is Jerusalem, which is quite a topic, and the fourth is actually the tension on the Temple Mount. About the conflict, first I think it is important to say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is still with us. Some people think that we are already in a post-conflict situation, and we can already speak about all kind of, economic things and formulas that will eventually enable the Palestinians to forget that there is a conflict. No, there is a conflict. The conflict is on land. There is occupation. The international community says that there is occupation. There are more settlements that are being built in the West Bank. And actually there are two people, Jewish Israelis on the one side and Palestinians on the other side, that not only that speak in two different languages, Hebrew and Arabic, but also speak in two different political languages. And I think that this is one of the problems of this conflict, that there is hardly no dialogue between the two sides, and each side starts to explain the situation from very, very different point of view. I think that it is important to understand this, because at the end of the day, between the Jordan River and the sea, there is only one army, this is the IDF, and there is only one state, this is the state of Israel, and there is only one law of return, this is the Israeli Jewish law of return. And I think that once, if we want to imagine a peaceful situation, we will also need to bring into more equality also in these rights. About Jewish-Arab relations, I think it's a very important context, especially in the fact that the people who actually committed this crime were citizens of Israel from Al-Fahim. One should not try to justify this kind of act, and I think that this is also rather obvious that a lot of the Arab leadership in Israel condemned it, and I'm sure that Rawnak will have more to say about it. But from the state point of view, there is a discrimination against Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, and this is not something that I say, and this is not something, I don't know, that the Palestinian organization said. This is the conclusion of the Israeli government's investigation committee, the Theodore Orr, the Justice Committee in 2000, that said that Arabs in Israel are being discriminated against from 1948 until today in all walks of life just for being Arabs. I think that one needs to understand it in order to understand also the stress and the tension and the dissatisfaction of Palestinian citizens of Israel. One can see it also in the Negev and in the tensions that happen there. One can see it in the universities and in a very small number of Arab scholars there. One can see it, in quotes and messages that are being sent from the Israeli government to the Arab citizens of Israel, from the Prime Minister Netanyahu, that actually in the last election used it while saying that the Arabs are driving in huge blocks to the ballots, which eventually helped him win the elections, to the Minister of Defense, Avigdor Lieberman, who about the city of Al-Fahim, from where the three Arabs who committed this attack came from, said that Al-Fahim is not part of Israel and it should be given to the Palestinians in return to some of the settlements. I think that all of this treatment from the state of Israel to the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel does not help to solve this tension. The third context, very important, that sometimes we tend to forget, is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city that is torn in conflict. Israel indeed celebrated 2017 as 50 years to the unification of Jerusalem, but I don't know any Arab citizens of Jerusalem who celebrated this unification. Jerusalem has about 800,000 people, out of which 350,000 are Palestinians. Most of them are not citizens of Israel. Most of them are citizens of Palestine and residents of Jerusalem. It's quite a matrix and it's quite an uneasy situation, but Jerusalem is a city that has huge differences between West and East, and while Palestinians consider it to be their capital and Israelis consider it to be their capital, the current situation is that there is quite a lot of tension in any contact between Palestinian residents of the city and Israeli police. The four contexts, and this is actually what we are going to speak about today, so maybe it will be kind of a springboard for Rawnak to continue or to say what she thinks about it, is Temple Mount Al-Haram al-Sharif itself, which is in the middle of this conflict. I'm sure that many of you know that the Temple Mount obviously is a very sacred place for religious Jews, for ultra-Orthodox Jews. And because of this sacredness, there is even a decision of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, which was also the decision of ultra-Orthodox in Jerusalem and generally in Eretz Israel, in Israel-Palestine. Before 48, the Jews are not allowed on the Temple Mount. They are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Today, in 40 minutes, Tisha B'Av is going to start, the 9th of Av, and I spoke with many of my ultra-Orthodox friends or people that I know, and they told me that this is forbidden, that the only thing that is allowed is to pray for the Messiah to come, but this is definitely not forbidden to walk on top on the Temple Mount. This is considered to be Chilul HaKodesh, like the desecration of this holy place. And over the last 10 years, 15 years, we see that there is a shift in the attitude of official Israel to the Temple Mount. There was a famous TV show about 2 years ago in Channel 10. It's called Hamakor by Raviv Drucker, who is maybe Israel's number one journalist. And he had a few interviews with Israeli police from Jerusalem. And they said that after every meeting of the Committee of Interior in the Knesset that discussed the status quo on the Temple Mount and the idea of bringing more Jews to pray there, there was more and more violence on the mountain. There was an unprecedented number. In 2014, this committee, the Committee of Interior, held 15 meetings on the Jewish right to pray on top of the Temple Mount. This is considered by Palestinians who speak different language, both as Arabic but also different political language, as straightforwardly provocation, as a violation of the status quo. And I think that one should remember also this, that before that the tension started on the Temple Mount, this place was already quite tense, and that the more Israeli officials are speaking about the changing of the status quo, the more that we are going to see this kind of sad and tragic acts. I think that it is important to remember that the second Intifada in October 2000 started when then the head of opposition, Ariel Sharon, went to a visit to the Temple Mount, which should remind us how sensitive the situation is and how explosive the situation is. And I think that it's important to remember that even this current tension began about 2 years ago, but one of the leading events that brought to the more explosion on the Temple Mount was a visit of another minister, then the Minister of Agriculture, Uri Ariel, on the Temple Mount, that by many of Israeli analysts is considered to be another match that actually sparked this current tension on the Temple Mount. I think that this is very important to remember, that while Israel is in charge of the situation outside the Temple Mount, the situation inside the Temple Mount is the authority of the Waqf, of the Islamic Waqf. And we need, I think, to respect this situation and to respect the status quo and to repeat it over and over again in order to avoid this kind of violent acts and response. And I will be obviously more than happy to respond later on, but I think that it is important because I hear quite a lot of discussions here in Israel, but also maybe abroad, and in which it is almost as if the tension started while the first Palestinian held a gun, or while the first Palestinian held a knife, or while the first Palestinian terror attack took place. I think it is important, and this is not to justify any acts of violence, which I'm obviously against, but it is just to say that we are in an ongoing conflict, and in this ongoing conflict, we need to find a solution to this conflict, and the solution will not come from magnetometers, and will not come from all kind of, I think, security checks. It will come from negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians, and from an Israeli recognition of the current situation, of the ongoing occupation, and of the need to reach a solution with the Palestinians.
Thank you, Roni, for this brief kind of introduction of what we're discussing today. Rawnak, please pick it up from where it was left off. If you can speak loud and slow, so even those on the other side of the ocean can hear you well. That'll be great.
Thank you, Michal. I'll try my best. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's an honor to be with you today. In my presentation, it's going to be an attempt from my side to interpret and to explain a complicated situation of the reality in Israel that both Arabs and Jews are going through. I will do my best to explain the complexity, and I have to promise from the beginning not to be able to give simple and clear answer to all of your questions, but I will more try to reflect on how the Arab minority in Israel sees the situation. And as Dr. Yoni said in his presentation, one should see what's going on nowadays in the wider context. I do agree on that, and I think it's quite important point to start the presentation with. I think that one can summarize the complicity and the tragedy of the Palestinian minority in Israel, which of course reflects on our lives, both Arabs and Jews, by quoting Ayman Audi, the head of the Joint List, who once said, my country is on a war with my people. Arabs in Israel are in fact part of the Palestinian nation. We are not going through Palestinization process as some try to put it. We are Palestinians, and many of us have in fact relatives living in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And we watch our country, Israel, treating our people, holding them and free with no basic rights and under siege every single day. So I just would like to ask you to take a few seconds and imagine a situation where the USA, your country, decides to go on a war against Israel, God forbidden. Many of you don't live in Israel and are not religiously connected to the land, but feels connected to both countries, and try to think how would you react and how that would feel. Now, the Arabs in Israel, the Palestinian citizen of Israel, chose long time ago the political peaceful struggle for achieving equal rights within the state of Israel and for ending the occupation, which part of our nation is suffering from still. The leadership made a historical decision to run to the Knesset and to be part of the political game, the same Knesset which symbolized the control on half of the nation and on the land. And in the last election, they got the support of 95% of the Arabic population, which is the percentage of Arabs who voted for the joint party in the Knesset. So the support of being part of a political struggle and nonviolent struggle is from all sides, from the political leadership and from the people. While that happens, some individuals of the minority, and with no coordination with the leadership nor support from the people, decide to be part of the struggle violently and makes attacks in Al-Aqsa. Such a violent and horrible attack, where it's carried by the citizens of Israel, is an exceptional case, as Yoni just pointed out. But instead of dealing with it as such, the government decided to describe it as a pattern and as representing the Arabs and the Arabic leadership. And the Prime Minister by himself decided to put on the table on these difficult times the historical threat of negating the citizenship of more than 100,000 of people living in Al-Fahim and Wadi Ara, where the attacks came from. This is the way that the Arabic minority sees the things. So while just a few months ago from our work in Sikuri, we witnessed a big happening made by the locals in the area when hundreds of Jews visit the villages in Ramadan tours, and witnesses how proud the locals are for the fact that their town is becoming a tourism attraction for Jews, hosting them in the mosques, opening their homes and hearts for them. This attack comes just a few weeks after this happening. Now, the Prime Minister brings to the table the idea of land exchange and threat and colors a town of more than 60,000 people, which is Al-Fahim Wadi Ara, as being terrorists, suggesting moving them to the West Bank. In other words, negating their citizenship. This threat, which been brought to public discourse by Mr. Lieberman 20 years ago almost, became nowadays more than legitimate step to consider, and considered as a good solution by many Jews. It means, in fact, a condition of citizenship, continuous threat on the status of the citizens and the citizenship, that we are what we call second-class citizens. This is the message which gets through by taking out this threat every second, in any occasion. This is why the minority is trying all it can to integrate, wanting to believe that the 922 decision, which probably many of you heard about, is real, wanting to believe that the government wants to integrate us in the job market and etc. Now, one should also be aware of the fact that Al-Haram al-Sharif or Al-Aqsa is a religious symbol, but not only. For Christians, for seculars like myself, it's mainly a national historical symbol. which is basically under the control of the Islamic Waqf. But Israel, since the visit of Prime Minister Sharon Dal to Al-Aqsa back in 2000, which provoked the Second Intifada and led to the death of 13 Arabs from Israel by the police forces, since then, the messages by actions and by acts from the Israeli politicians is to change, or is an attempt to change, the status quo agreement between the two sides. The Muslims and the Arabs are witnessing slight and gradual changes of the status quo. For example, once part of the agreement was that soldiers are not allowed to visit the Al-Aqsa, and it's been changed to as long as they are not wearing their uniforms, then they can come as groups. So this is the kind of evidence which sends the signal for the Arabs that Israel is trying to get hands on Al-Aqsa. Now, putting the electric gates and the cameras around Al-Aqsa, which you probably heard about, symbolize for the people the control over the place and not just a security check, which being removed gradually from the Palestinians and the Islamic Waqf to Israel. The Israeli government understood, and both the Shabak and the police recommended the Prime Minister not to put these security checks around Al-Aqsa because they understood what the implications of such a decision. But the Prime Minister decides to do so despite the recommendation, which strengthens the feeling among the Arabs that Al-Aqsa is in a real danger. So despite the threat, the Arabic leadership and a wide majority of the Arabic population in Israel condemned the attacks and announced that the Palestinian citizens of Israel should keep their struggle for equality and for ending the occupation non-violent. People from all over the country participate in peaceful demonstration, but the only pictures shown in the Hebrew media is the violence incidents, even though they were rare at this stage. This is why the Arabic Facebook filled with videos of private participants in demos showing prayers being attacked while they are praying on the street or while they are sitting in front of the gates. I'm bringing these two contrary pictures to show you how the messages are just the messages getting to the Arabic minority and to the majority of the Jews are just in contrary and the opposite. As to add to the complicity, the attack in Al-Aqsa, which doesn't represent the position of the Arabic leadership, nor at least 95% of the Arabs in Israel, the victims of this attack happens to be Arabs too, Druze, who basically served in the army and the police forces. And the Druze are also part of the Palestinian people. If one meets the Druze soldiers in the street without their uniform and their guns, they would speak Arabic. They will look and behave exactly like me. But despite the fact that they are part of the army and part of the police forces, they won't feel safe in the shared space, especially in tense times like these days. They will not feel safe to speak Arabic. And they can be attacked just because of appearing like Arabs. They live in towns together with Muslims, Christians, and Druze at the same towns and villages, like in Mrar, Shfa'amer, and normally live in peace and harmony, which also shows in the local leadership, which is able to keep the harmony. Now, seeing them in the media after the attacks, arresting Palestinians violently, etc., make them even in more sensitive situation, also in their hometowns and villages. This complicity brings the Arabic leadership to take the rejection and the condemning the violence and the attack on Al-Aqsa one step further, and the leadership decides to visit the families of the policemen who was killed under the attack, not the families of the attackers, but the families of the policemen, the victims, so as to send a signal that we are one nation to the street and to prevent internal conflict between the Muslims and the Christians and the Druze in their hometowns. They act responsibly, while the government does the opposite. This visit, of course, is not being covered by the Hebrew-speaking media, but creates a discussion in the Arabic street. On on the issue of should the leadership all of a sudden support the soldiers of who are part of the occupation, or what our position from this issue. Now, every time such an attack and such a violent event happens, we breathe relieved that it doesn't end with another October like in 2000, or in a worse scenario to a citizen war. But the feeling is that the right-wing ministers are acting so irresponsible time after time. The speech of Wadi Ara as terrorists and the speech on the Arabic leadership in the same way is just making the situation more and more sensitive. And we witness that happens often, unfortunately, in the recent time, even before the attacks in Al-Aqsa, like the last incitement campaign when the fire got to Haifa, and while we were struggling against the fire, Arabs and Jews aside, I come from Haifa myself. The first thing we read in the papers is ministers accusing the Arabs of setting the land on fire. And I don't want to imagine how that could have happened if they didn't actually change the discourse and start speaking a little bit more moderate after considering this step. So this is, as I said, an attempt of giving analysis of or reflecting for you how the Arabic minority and the society sees the situation, especially in these difficult days after the attack in Al-Aqsa.
Thank you, Rawnak. We'll open now for questions. If you want to submit a question via phone, you need to press #1 on your phones, and the operator will put you in line. You can also email me, or email Liron, who took the RSVP, with questions if that's easier. I already have one question for you, Yoni. How is Temple Mount different to any other religious sites? Some are even more sacred, that have metal detectors and measures. Why here it became such a big deal?
You mean there are holier places inside the country?
Other religious sites in the world, which are more sacred to other religions and take security measures. Why here it became such a big deal?
Well, the thing about the Temple Mount, Al-Haram al-Sharif, is, and I use the two terms because you know that there was also quite a controversy when the UNESCO used only one of them, only Al-Haram al-Sharif, and then it was considered to be a decision for the favor of the Palestinians. But I think that when we speak about this place, about the mountain, first we need to remember that this is not the first time that we have this kind of violent there. Actually, when we go back before 1948 to 1929 to 1921 to 1936, Jerusalem and Hebron, by the way, were always two sites that were a focal point for quite a lot of violence. It is the case because these are two very holy cities, and they are holy for the two people, for both Jews and Muslims. Hebron, just because I mentioned it, is important because this is where the tomb of the patriarch is, the Abraham tomb, or Ibrahim or Abraham in Hebrew, and this is a sacred place for both Jews and Muslims. And because once then there is a conflict, a national conflict, each side says this is only me, or this is only mine. This is a zero-sum game that we are all aware of. The same situation has happened in the Temple Mount, the Kotel, the Western Wall from 1929, that every change to the status quo. In 1929, it was, if I'm not wrong, when a group of Jewish prayers put a bench next to the Western Wall or something like this. Every change to the status quo there is considered to be a provocation and is translated within the greater national conflict. Now, in our case, when we look at other cases or other holy cities, if we go to look at Mecca, for example, in Saudi Arabia, or if we look at look at the Vatican, so first these places are not in conflict. It's not that in Mecca there are two people there that are fighting on the same place. And it's not that the people who go into Mecca to pray into the Kaaba are Jews, while the guards are Muslims. No, it is a Muslim guard, and most people who go inside, or all people who go inside, will be Muslims. And in the Vatican, quite about the same, especially if people are going to pray. So the guards will be, I don't know, coming from the Vatican, and the people who go to pray will be Christians. There will not be this kind of explosive tension between the guard and the prayer. And here this is the situation. On Friday, this is the Friday prayer, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of Muslims who go into the Temple Mount, and they are being checked by Israelis. So this is one already point of tension. The second point of tension is the actual place itself. While the international community acknowledges that Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, and while the international community acknowledges that Westminster is in Britain, the international community does not acknowledge the fact that the Temple Mount and the Old City in Jerusalem and all territories beyond 1967 line borders are actually in Israel. And I think that the last visit even of the U.S. President Donald Trump to the country showed it very clearly, because when he visited, for example, the Israeli Museum in West Jerusalem, he was accompanied by the Prime Minister, by Netanyahu. But once he visited the Western Wall, it was much more sensitive, even from an American point of view, because it will be kind of changing the attitude of the U.S. and, in a way, of other countries as well towards this place. The Old City in Jerusalem is a disputed area, not disputed in the sense that I'm saying it is not holy for the Muslims or that it is not holy for the Jews. Obviously, it is very sacred for Jewish believers, and it is very sacred for Muslim believers, and it is very important for Israelis, and it is very important for Palestinians, put even religion aside. But it is also a place that is disputed. It was annexed by Israel in 1967. It was not acknowledged as annexed by the Palestinians and the international community. Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. I think that we are the only capital in the world that does not have any embassy in the capital, because all embassies in Israel are located in Tel Aviv or around Tel Aviv. Because of this very fact, because part of Jerusalem, the eastern side of Jerusalem, was occupied in 1967 and is considered by the international community and obviously by many Israelis who are not, I would say it nicely, who are not represented in the current government, let's put it this way, who think that this place should be is in conflict that should be resolved. How it is going to be resolved, this is, I think, an open question, because one can see maybe Jerusalem should become an international city, that Jews and Palestinians will live there together, and the sovereignty will be given to God and not to people. Other option would be maybe a shared municipality. Another option will be actually separation of Jerusalem. One part will be governed by Palestinians and another by Israelis. But the current situation that Israel is the only sovereign in Jerusalem on all holy sites, and actually in the West Bank as well, because at the end of the day Israel is controlling also the West Bank, I think that it is not a healthy situation. And I'm not saying that it is not healthy for the Palestinians. Obviously, to be a Palestinian who live in the West Bank, who live under the occupation, who live in a refugee camp is not very good. It's very bad. It's very tragic. It's hopeless. But I think that this situation is also not healthy for Israelis, for Jewish Israelis. It is not healthy for the future of this state. It is not healthy for the future of this society. I don't think that it brings about new generations that is more moral or stronger or kind of more aware of the situation. I think that the current situation and conflict and the conflict being so much not resolved, and Israelis do not meet Palestinians anymore, and they only see them on television, and they are afraid of them, and they are afraid of their language, and they are afraid of the Middle East. This is all not very good. It's not good news for Israel and for the future of Israel in the region.
Thank you. Operator Donna, do we have anyone waiting to ask on the phone?
No, we don't have any questions from the phone so far.
Okay, so I'll continue to read from emails. Rawnak, to you, it seems that the Arab leadership took its time in condemning the attack. Right following the attack, how did the Arab media cover the attack? Why did it take so long for the Arab leadership to condemn the attack and eventually not being able to produce a strong, coherent statement, but rather statements which sounded quite weak, and also by the different groups, there wasn't ability to come up with a strong, united message.
I would like just to start, Michal, to comment on what you asked Yoni before, just to say that the Aqsa is of course a holy place for the Muslims, but as I said in my presentation, it's not only. One should remember that it became the symbol of the resistance of the Palestinian people, and the Al-Aqsa itself became the symbol of the struggle for the independence of Palestinians, and for many secular people and even Christians in the Arabic between the Arabic minority, it's considered as the symbol. And even though some try to put the conflict around Al-Aqsa into the only Islamic and religious context, it is not really only the Islamic and religious context, but also the political. Now, as to your question, what's going on is that the Palestinian leadership is against violence struggle, especially when it comes from the citizens of Israel. The fact that, and that was a very quick and quiet, clear message from the leadership. The fact that the incidents happen in occupied territories make it a little bit more complicated to make a statement. From the position of saying, well, we are Palestinian citizens of Israel, we have a different situation. We are not living under occupation. We are having a better conditions, even though it's still difficult conditions we are living in, and we are feeling like second-class citizens and being discriminated against in all different aspects of life. It's still our situation is better. Who is suffering from the occupation and the daily lack of basic rights, electricity and water and so on, is our brothers under the occupation in the West Bank and in Jerusalem and so on. And we as Arabic leadership, I'm just reflecting on what the leadership would say, we are not in a position to dictate for the Palestinians in the West Bank on which ways of struggles they should be dealing with or should using, even though as a principle we are against violence. So let's make it a little bit more, or can explain that the leadership took a little while so as to come out with the condemning, and I would say that also the fact that the attackers were citizens of Israel came as a shock for the leadership, especially that the leadership has a consensus, 100% consensus of nonviolent struggle so as to promote equality for the Palestinian citizens within Israel, and also to struggle against the occupation from our position.
Thank you. Do you want to repeat the instructions for submitting questions over the phone?
Yes.
Donna?
If you'd like to ask a question, please press #1 on your phone. Again, that's #1 if you have any questions. And
Thank
we
you.
have a question.
Okay.
All right, Ken Bandler, I'm opening the line now.
Hi, Ken.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
This is my question if Jerusalem should become the focus of some negotiation, and what role should the United States in particular play? And admittedly, there's certain challenges with the Trump administration, but should the United States pay more attention? Should try to there's been no peace process for several years, no direct negotiations. How can the United States be most helpful in focusing and trying to get some negotiations that would involve Israelis and Palestinians and other parties directly concerned with the Temple Mount and related issues?
Yoni, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start, and then I can continue. Well, that's a very good question because on the one hand, we want the situation, obviously, whether if we are from America or from Israel, if we are Jews or Muslims, we want the situation here to get better. We want people here to live, and we want people here to live peacefully and to have obviously self-determination and their own country and independence, so on and so forth. And the question is whether the solution will come from within. I mean, whether the leadership of Israel and the Palestinian leadership will decide that they are going to do it themselves and they don't need any help from outside, or that there will be external support or initiative, for example, like happened in 1978 in the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty that was signed between President Carter and President Begin in Israel and President Sadat in Egypt. In 1994, when it was President Clinton and President Rabin and King Hussein, and in 1993 also with Palestinian President Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Rabin, and as well with Clinton. That's a very good question, but as I see it, it is not very likely that the Israeli leadership will now have any incentive to go towards peace negotiation with the Palestinians. It is not to say that the Israeli leadership does not want peace, but I think that this current government and the new trend of thought in Israel is actually that we can have a different solution, which is not the two-state solution, but it is something like the 1.5 state. This is what I kind of feel from the behavior of the Israeli leadership and also politicians, because you feel that you hear more and more decision makers who say all of Eretz Israel is ours, all of Israel Palestine is ours, from the Jordan River to the sea. There are no settlements. There is only Israeli villages. Palestinians are all terrorists, and so on and so forth. The Palestinian leadership are terrorists, and there is incitement. They only inciting against us. I have a feeling that we reached a situation in which the Israeli leadership, and it's very difficult for me to say it, but this is what I feel, are not willing to compromise for peace. There is total rejection of the Palestinian side and total lack of trust between the two sides. So as I see it, the negotiation will not come just because one day the Israeli Prime Minister or another important minister will stand up and say we need to go forward with the Palestinians. Now the question is which kind of intervention or stress or pressure will be helpful and which one will not be helpful. And it's all very big questions because there are different parties and countries that are trying to influence the situation here positively, and it doesn't really happen. I think that the American administration, the Donald Trump, the president, should say, he already said that it is an important region for him and he wants to reach a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but I think that at the end of the day, one should also have a route towards this deal. And this route should be an original one, meaning just to say two-state for two people, 1967 line is not enough, especially because there are so many Jewish Israelis who live on the other side of the Green Line. And second, because we need to find a way to think about the future life of Israel-Palestine. This is, of course, my view, not as two states that are totally separated from one another, let's say like Israel and Egypt. Israel and Palestine are going to be two countries that will have relationship between them. And I think that instead of speaking about the separation only between Israelis and Palestinians, one should speak about the relationship in the post-conflict or in the post-agreement situation. I think that the American administration should show that it is willing to be more equal in its attitudes to Israel-Palestine, meaning that on every visit to Israel, on times spent in Israel, they should also spend time in Palestine. And I think that also, this is also quite a sensitive issue. But many of the Palestinians feel that the fact that the president has a lot of advisors that have friends in Israel and relatives in Israel, but no friends and relatives in Palestine, means that this is not an equal or a non-biased administration. So I think that it would be good if the administration of the Trump administration will build a team that will be made of different scholars or different experts who represent different voices, that will kind of be his a close circle that will eventually bring on an idea or a route or a settlement that will be put on the table and will just not just be words about the importance of reaching into deal.
Thank you. We do have many questions coming in. So Rawnak, I do want to present another question to you on a different issue. Protests within Israel, within the Arab community in Israel, as response to developments around Temple Mount, were relatively quiet this time around. When you compare them, for example, to the last time when there was tension around Temple Mount in the year 2000, where you both reflected on before, where demonstrations got very violent and 13 people were shot dead. Do you feel that the fact that demonstrations within Israel this time were quiet, were more modest, do you feel that this reflects a change in Arab society? Do you feel that this can be contributed to the strong economic integration of Arab citizens that the government of Israel has been promoting so heavily in recent years?
Well, I had to say, Michal, that my observation of the evidence and the demonstrations of also an historical point of view is a slightly different of what you described. Basically, most of the demonstrations in the Arabic street has always been or started as peaceful, including the demonstrations which took place back in 2000. And the problem is that the police forces has been pushing and provoking in a way the violence in these demonstrations, or even dealing with if a slight evidence or slight actions of violence taking place, dealing with it with a huge reaction which doesn't really justify the amount of violence. I mean, you can see the way the police forces actually deals with the violence which happens in the Jewish sector when there is some demonstration, and how they are able to deal with the situation without having anybody killed or having a loss of life in the way when you compare it with what's going on in the Arabic society. I think that the Arabic society generally, mostly, is willing to integrate and would like to be part of the life in Israel, including the economical life and the job market. And as I described before, the 922 decision which the government has put in on the table was basically people wanted to believe that it's really happening. The trouble is that you cannot in one side send a signal of we want to integrate you and we want you to be part of the society, but at the same time sending at the same pretty day send this as a contrary message saying that we want to evacuate you and we want to negate your citizenship. So this contrary message confuses the Arabs and the minority in Israel, despite the wish and the will that people really want to integrate and really want to have peaceful life. So the demonstrations are basically, our experience is that even demonstrations where they are peaceful, normally the headlines and the newspapers is that have here another demonstration where it's been violent, even in those demonstrations where it was quite peaceful. So I would say that this is not representing a change, but it's more it's not reflecting on a change on the society, because this is the situation within the last more than 20 years.
Okay. Do we have a question on the phone?
Hi, we don't have any questions over the phone.
Okay, good. so I can continue to read the questions that I get via email. Another question coming from the far west coast. It seems that in the past year, there is a rise in the involvement of Arab citizens in terror. What used to be seen as marginalized involvement in previous years, in the past year we saw, or past 2 years, we saw there were Arab citizens involved in the knife intifadas, in the shooting in Tel Aviv, now within Temple Mount. Is this reflective of a certain trend that is happening now within Arab society? Rawnak, if you want to open, and then Yoni, if you would like to continue.
What was the end of the question? If it's reflecting on? I didn't hear you.
Is this reflective of a trend? Yes. Is this reflective of a certain trend within Arab society of the way they choose to protest? Maybe it has something to do with Arab leadership incitement. How do you see this, or do you still feel it's marginalized? It's a marginalized incident.
Yeah, I definitely still see it as marginalized incident, even though it's a horrible attack. I don't want to be misunderstood, of course. No, every and each singular of life matters in this case, but still, if we are speaking about millions of people living in the country, and I have much more positive incidents of people who would rather integrate and would rather have a peaceful life, and then some individuals decide to act by themselves and I don't know, it's not to justify their actions, but they decide that their life is more or less meaningless and decide to make such an attack. But it's still, I mean, even if we try to count the incidents which happened within the last centuries, where it's held by Palestinian citizens of Israel, it won't pass the 5 attacks or even less. So of course, it's for me, it's still, I won't call it a tendency moving to the violence action, but rather still marginalized phenomenon being held by individuals and not representing the majority of the minority.
Should I continue?
Yoni, do you want to? Yes, please. How do you see this? How do you analyze that? What seems to be a trend, or maybe it's not a trend?
Well, I think that we should remind ourselves that the general kind of history of the relations between the State of Israel and the Arab citizens of Israel. Between 1948 to 1966, this is the first 18 years of the State of Israel, the Arab citizens of Israel were not equal citizens, and they were held under military regime. And then after 1966, from onwards, they were citizens, and they did not need to have a permit to go from the Negev to Haifa and from Leer to Ramle to the Galilee and so on and so forth. But the first 18 years were very defining, I think, in the history of the relation between the state and the Arab citizens. I would say that the relationship has not healed since then. Then we have 1967, and the situation was different between Israelis and Arab citizens. In 1976, there is an important land day of the land confiscation in the Galilee. But I think that the real watershed that maybe the gentleman or the lady who asked these questions wanted to speak about, the real watershed comes at the year 2000. This is where the Intifada al-Aqsa starts. Again, Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, where the imagination and the political aspiration of both Jews and Palestinians in the West Bank and in Israel as well are being kind of captured. And then it was in 2000 that the Intifada started in Al-Aqsa and in the West Bank, but also there were demonstrations by Palestinian citizens of Israel. And in this demonstration, there were 13 demonstrators that were shot dead by the Israeli police, and this is a wound that is still open. Again, I think that it is important to mention the investigation committee of Justice Or. It is an open wound between the State of Israel and the Arab citizen, in which 13 demonstrators died. Now, I think that the Palestinians in Israel felt then in 2000 that the same attitude that Palestinians in the West Bank received, they also receive as citizens of Israel. Because obviously one would not imagine a demonstration, and I'm happy also obviously that this is not happening, that a demonstration by citizens of Israel that eventually is being stopped by live bullets. I don't want Israeli police to use live bullets against Jewish demonstrators and Arab demonstrators, secular or religious. I think that police should not kill demonstrators. This was a mistake at the time. It was a crime, and actually the people who were held responsible for this were dismissed from their position. But what I wanted to say about it, that since 2000 and until today, you have more and more violence between Israel and Palestine. You have two people who believe that they made the best offer to the other side, and that the other side rejected it, and this is why violence is kind of more not desired, but kind of taken forward, and there is more and more violence, and we see it from one year to the other. I think that we are going to see more and more of it if we are not going to find a solution to the conflict, if the siege on Gaza is not going to stop, if the situation in the West Bank is not going to improve. And once that the Palestinians in Israel are witnessing the rise of violence in the West Bank, there are also in the sidelines, not a central wave within the Arab citizens of Israel. In the sidelines, you have people, mostly youngsters, who are being motivated or sparked or inspired by this kind of violence, and they think that acting violently will be part of the Palestinian cause against the Israeli occupation. I think that these people obviously are doing something that is very bad for them and for the Arab citizens of Israel, and I think that the Arab citizens of Israel should remain loyal to the cause, but to the political cause, using political vehicles and messages, and not violent.
Thank you. We do have more questions, but unfortunately we have to finish as it is 1 p.m. I want to thank you both very much for taking the time to share your insights about how this recent effects kind of correspond and affect Jewish-Arab relations within the country. This call was recorded if anyone want to share it with their constituencies, and we look forward to having you on our next educational briefing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rawnak. Thank you, Yoni.
Thank you.
And good night to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The call has now ended. Have a great day, everyone.